Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me for another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today I will be talking about Season 2, Episode 9, Crack of Doom, starring Robert Horton as Mason Bridges and Robert Middleton as Sam Clinker. And I have to say, this was a very good episode. It's a little bit of a change of pace from most of the other Season 2 episodes so far, but I did think it was pretty suspenseful and handled well for the most part, and this was probably my favorite Season 2 episode so far. So we start with some men talking to each other about playing a poker game, and it turns out they need one more player. So they talk to a man named Mason, but he declines and says he doesn't play. So later on, one of the other men that he knows talks to him about it, and Mason, for the rest of the episode, narrates in flashback and basically tells the man why he doesn't gamble at all. So an interesting format that works pretty well as we get to really find out a lot of the character of Mason's thoughts, although I do have one slight complaint with this format, which I will go into when I get to the end of the episode. So we now flash back in time and hear the story, and we're introduced to our other main character, Sam Clinker. And it turns out these two men have some kind of business arrangement. I'm not really sure exactly what it was, but it turns out that Sam gives Mason $10,000 to hold for him until the next day because basically business hours are over at this time. He also tells Mason, I trust you. You're an honest person, which is kind of interesting with what happens the rest of the episode, which takes place that night. It also turns out that there's going to be a poker game at Clinker's house and that Mason is invited, but it's also made clear that Mason doesn't have the same kind of finances that Clinker does, but he decides he'll play anyway. So we go to the night of the game, and it turns out that Mason loses like $1,000, but he's upset about this, and I guess his ego or pride, whatever you want to call it, gets in the way, and he needs more money. So his plan is to take out some of the money that he was given, like $4,000 earlier in the day by Clinker, and he figures if he loses, he'll just replace it with money from his own savings the next day, which, as we'll find out as the episode goes on, probably not the smartest move in the world to make. So, of course, Mason loses again. He says he loses the money rather quickly in like an hour, which is pretty fast, I have to say. So now he has to go home and talk to his wife about this. But it turns out there's some more bad news as his wife, her name is Jessie, I believe. It turns out she invested all their savings in some kind of oil company and the investment didn't work out. So now they basically have no money in their savings either. So Mason has no way to pay Clinker back. And this is not a good situation at this point, I have to say. So Mason has to come up with a new plan. And he basically decides the best thing he can do is take the rest of Clinker's money and use it to try and get his money back. Again, probably not a great idea. So he goes back to Clinker's place. Clinker is suspicious, but he lets him play. And basically this whole episode comes down to one hand of poker, which we're told about. It turns out that Mason has 3 queens, I believe it is, and Clinker has 3 tens. And both men think the other might be bluffing about having a 4th. And I have to say this scene was handled very suspensefully and very well acted by both men. I thought it worked very, very well. So at this point, Mason decides to go all in, thinking he really has 4 queens. However, he soon realizes that he misread his hand, and one of his cards is a jack. Probably not a good mistake to make. So Mason is basically bluffing without wanting to bluff. What's also interesting is that Clinker actually has 4 tens, but he falls for the bluff and folds. So Mason winds up winning, and he's basically out of trouble. He at least got his money back. So it's a lesson learned for Mason, and we now understand why he chooses not to gamble anymore in the present time. Like I said, I do have one slight complaint with this episode, and that's because of the flashback format and Mason telling the story in the present. I was pretty sure nothing extremely terrible or bad was going to happen to him, as he seems to be doing okay in the present time. So I did think that took a little bit of the mystery and suspense out of the episode. But the flashback format was effective, so no real big complaint. So overall, Crack of Doom is a nice change of pace episode, and I give it a 4 out of 5. And it is an episode that I recommend for fans of the show to watch, even though it's not the typical murder suspense type mystery. I do think it's an episode well worth watching. So 4 out of 5 for Crack of Doom, and as always, thank you very much for watching.